Welcome back to Behaviorally Speaking, Leadership for Changemakers, the podcast where we explore leadership through the lens of behavior, data, and human-centered decision-making. Today, we're joined by Jennie Prochorenko-Stadelberger of Sereni Law Group, a seasoned special education leader and consultant who has supported teams across early childhood, K-12 education, and post-secondary transitions. In this episode, Jennie shares why she leads as a servant leader, how she dismantles silos through interdisciplinary collaboration, and the practical ways she uses behavioral principles such as positive reinforcement, prompting, and fading to empower students and staff. You will also hear how she turns parent frustration into partnership through active listening, how she leverages antecedent behavioral consequence data to guide decisions, and how she makes legal compliance feel less overwhelming and more actionable. Get ready to find a win in every day and walk away with tools you can use tomorrow. Let's get into the conversation. So Jennie, thank you so much for joining today's conversation. I'm so happy to have you here with me for a chat. I'm looking forward to what we're going to talk about today. So how are you feeling coming into today's episode?
Well, thank you for having me. I'm super excited. This is definitely something new, but I'm looking forward to discussing how we can better our leadership with like minds.
Wonderful. I love to hear it. So, Jennie, I know your educational journey is so rich, right? Can you share with our listeners your journey into special education and then, educational leadership, and just talk a bit about like what really inspired you to enter this field?
So I think this goes back to growing up. I was a pretty inquisitive kid. I observed a lot, and I had friends and family who struggled in school. I did not.
Right.
I was gifted. And I kind of wanted people to be able to succeed and do what I did, but I realized that they couldn't. And then when I got to high school, maybe some would say I was lazy, but instead of taking gym, I worked with the 18 to 21-year-old. And what I didn't know then was the life skills class. And that's what I realized, like, this is definitely my passion. This is what I want to do. Help all kids, it didn't matter what the age was, be successful in life. So, going into educational leadership, I was going to say, after being in a classroom a little over 10 years, I wanted to help more adults, help more kids, do the right thing, get the paperwork right, and tell their story and what helps them, tell stories to let them know they can be successful too.
Yeah.
Showing professionals how all kids can learn. You just have to set out a plan, give them the tools, and watch them grow.
Yeah, I love that. Jennie, what I'm finding in these conversations I'm having is like a lot of overlap. So the guest I spoke with last week, and one of them really talked about stories too, sharing stories, and you shared the same thing because they're so impactful. It's like sharing a bit of your life, to help influence others. So thank you for sharing that. So with all of your great experience, Jennie, and what led you into education and educational leadership, and your current, working in educational consulting, what core leadership principles do you apply when you're supporting on cases?
I would say that I'm a big picture person. So in leadership, I would say I'm a servant leader. So I kind of want to know how do all the team members work together and then figure out how their strengths work together, right? So and then if there isn't a team, then I have my why of what's going on here. My core principle, like leadership skills, I would say, is when you're a servant leader, you get in there with your team and you find out what's going on in the trenches. So when I apply that to consulting on educational cases, I always look at the team, and the group of people and their strengths that they can share for the success of the child. I think that in any leadership role, if you realize the team that's around you and the strengths that each individual holds, then you're going to have a better outcome, and no matter what the goal is.
Yeah, I really love that. I love that you talked about servant leadership, but you really talked about the group as a whole and recognizing the strengths of the team as one, one cohesive unit. So let's talk a little bit about collaborative leadership versus siloed leadership, right? And how has your leadership in educational systems, because in our experiences together, we've talked a lot about interdisciplinary collaboration, working across different teams, different departments, instead of, having so many silos within the organization. How has all of your experiences shaped your approach to working together?
I have to say, in all my positions, I always spoke with an emphasis on an interdisciplinary approach. So when I was in the local charter school that I worked at, I was a teacher, but then I became a leader, and I was part of the SAP team as well. So when I was part of the SAP team, the Students Assistant Program, where we worked with outside behavioral and mental health, you made sure to, in that position, I was going to say, I was in the high school, but I would take on the elementary cases. And when people talk about, even then, nothing was siloed out. We all came together as a team from different experience levels to come up with a plan for a child, seeking assistance not only from the child, but the family on the outside. Then if I go to early childhood, where I was the director of that early childhood systems, again, when I walked into a team, and I'm calling them a team, but they all were very much siloed out. So it was like health services and nutrition services. After 3 years, it was kind of like we're all a team, and each one of your parts has to be part of what makes this child great. So I don't think that I can't speak to how things would effectively work in a siloed model, because I've never really wanted to lead in that fashion, because I don't know that ever has been beneficial for kids in any way. And that's not just in special education. That would be for any child. Like, when you're really talking about the whole child, and when you take a whole child approach, if you do it in silos, you're all listening parallel, right? But you're never intersecting. And how do you help a child if you're all running parallel?
Right.
We should all be intersecting to make sure we meet that goal.
Yeah, I love that. And I really love that, all of your experience has really been, interdisciplinary, collaborative, not siloed, not fragmented, and you mentioned the family and you mentioned the child. So, to be community focused, to be family focused, we really have to be collaborative, right? We can't be separate units and, really expect to be able to, for example, increase family engagement, right? But if we all work together, then something like that is more likely to increase. So thank you for sharing that. So, Jennie, all of your cumulative experiences as an educational leader, we all experience challenges, right? Which one would you say contributed most to your resilience? And why do you think that experience made you the most resilient you can be today?
To be quite honest, I think that my resilience was created from escalated parents' frustrations. By either the lack of growth or the perception that something wasn't being provided for their child to be better. And I'd say that listening to frustrations and having emotional intelligence, my emotional intelligence is high, and I would feel their hurt, and I'd want that to dissipate. So I would set that as my goal. So I would make that, this parent was screaming in my face on the steps of the school. I wanted them to be able to feel safe and feel heard and feel known. And once that happened many a times, I think that I knew that the next challenge wouldn't be so hard. We could do anything for kids. We just have to make a plan and execute it. And I think that's what made me more and more resilient, is when you really step into someone as a parent. And I can say that as a parent, because when I was a teacher and I wasn't a parent, it might have looked different. But when you feel and you hear the hurt that they're experiencing, that's made me very resilient to be able to handle the next challenge.
Yeah. I love that. And you talked about parent challenges. That you hit the nail on the head there. I mean, I'd probably say the same for me, if I really were to think of, and give my own views, because they occur on a daily basis. But something you said made me think of like this concept of forced adaptability, where it's unexpected, the parent crisis, the parent conflict, the parent challenges, oftentimes they're unexpected. They come as like surprises. They catch us off guard. So we're forced to adapt. And just as you explained, then, that really contributes to your, resilience. But what I also try to share with my teams, to Jenny, even I, had a check-in with the staff today, and I was talking about mistakes, my bigger thing is what can you learn from it? So like all of those adverse experiences, in our lives or in our professional experiences, such as the parent challenges, but then what can we learn from it? And I think I'm hearing that coming to me from what you just said, like you were able to learn from all of those experiences, right? And that allowed you to be as resilient. Right?
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah.
Wonderful. So with all of the breadth of your educational experiences, Jenny, which one would you say gave you most of your motivation to continue to work in this field? As we just talked about, parent challenges, Jenny, is just one of them. We're faced with challenges every day. What would you say like really motivates you to just continue to work in this field, right? Where you can be of service to others. I wonder, is it the servant leadership you spoke about, or is it something else?
I think I'm a servant leader. Like I want to work with the people to find out the answers. The work motivates me. Watching children, adults, families reach success makes me feel better. So I know that some people you're watching data points move, right? And that data is attached to someone.
Right.
And if they're successful, then I feel I'm doing something right. And again, as a servant leader, like I want to work with my people. I want to make sure that the curriculum works. I want to make sure that, they're not stressed out, that they get a breather. So going down into the trenches to see what that is always makes that, the experience, I would say, that motivates me is I was the teacher. I came in an hour and a half early. I left an hour and a half late. I came in and did Saturday school to help the kids pass their standardized tests. And I'd love to see more of that. I mean, the world has definitely changed since I was in a classroom, but I was going to say I want to motivate others to do exactly what I'm doing eventually.
Yeah.
It's kind of like I'll fill my own shoes.
I love that. I'll fill my own shoes. I love that. That's really servant leadership in action, what I'm hearing you say. And, what I'm also hearing from what you're saying without you saying it is like really, really being focused on the dignity of others. Because by you being there, by you showing up early, by you going down the trenches, your visibility, right, really helps people feel heard. And I can see then how their progress and their success can motivate you and can encourage you to continue to, provide service to others in this field. So thank you for all of your work you're doing, Jenny.
Yeah, I just want to see more of it happen.
Yeah, wonderful. So let's talk a little bit about behavior, like my favorite topic.
Yes.
So what role, Jenny, I mean, I know you're very familiar with behavior analysis, behavior principles, the whole nine. What role how do you believe your understanding of, behavioral principles really impact your ability to lead diverse teams? Because, from our experiences together, I know you've worked with a very diverse team, of students, families, and staff.
I definitely would say that if you don't have the basic understanding of behavioral principles, not just for children, but for staff and for teams, it's going to be difficult to be able to lead. I think that the basics of behavior, just if you think of positive reinforcement, whether you're an employee or you're pre-K to 22, is even in college, is people as humans want to feel good.
Yeah.
And how does that happen? by a positive experience, by something positive happening to positive reinforcement. So I think that having that basic understanding, and it's not just talking at somebody or using a high tone. And, maybe 30, 40 years ago, you'll hear, well, that person can be old school. Well, it didn't work then. It's not going to work now.
Mm-hmm.
So I think again, the understanding of basic behavioral principles, in my leadership role with diverse teams is being positive, remaining positive. And especially like even going back to the stories of the parent screaming in your face is even ending those meetings on a positive note. Like you can reach out to me. I am here for you. Letting people know the work that we do, it might not be easy, but I used to say to my teams, all my leaders, you got to find a win in every day.
Right. I love that.
You have to find a win in every day. And some of them would, text me, or some of them would call me and let me know. And that just became like a routine because you have to find a win in it every day.
Yeah. I love that. You have to find a win in every day. And I think, that statement alone, like you said, the parents screaming in your face or any of those other challenging experiences really kind of transform how we as leaders, how us as leaders respond to resistance, right? It's sort of like motivational at the same time and kind of goes back to our previous conversation. So talking about behavior and all of those things, how then do you use behavioral data, right, to inform your leadership practices about students and staff as well?
I was going to say, I think that in most of my roles, we would use the ABC data, right? The antecedent, the behavior, the consequence.
Yeah.
And when I say consequence, like when I was working in a high school, maybe they did I was going to say they used to use in-house suspension, or it would be a detention. And when we use consequences for the little ones, I was going to say not really a consequence, but more of a shaping the behavior, right?
Yeah.
But I would say the data analytics for students, I was going to say I definitely would apply the ABCs when I would look at staff, right? So if I had a group of 20 kids in the same room, you can look at high school, right? If you had the same kids in one room and then they went to another and then all these behaviors happened in that one room, but they weren't happening in the other, you'd have a pretty good idea that the environment or something in that environment was changing. I was going to say, so when you looked at staff, you would, again, going into the trenches and actually seeing it is the best way to go about it. With children with special needs, we might call it an FBA, right? And I was going to say, but this isn't an FBA for staff. This is really finding out like what's making these kids tick or what's not happening with this teacher. And if it was something with staff that was as simple as posting a schedule or posting up a question or giving a visual and you would watch the behaviors decrease. It wasn't about saying, hey, you're doing a terrible job. It was like, hey, here's just a tool you weren't using. Let's try that. And the same thing would go with kids is when you're looking at the data is going to tell you, data always tells you something, right?
Yes.
I was going to say, and if you can help with the antecedents, so we don't, if you're looking at negative behaviors, if you're looking at antecedents, again, if we can nip that in the bud quicker than usual,
right?
Then we don't have to go into consequences that end up feeling that it's not a good feeling, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, totally. And, being able to apply or analyze the data, collect the data, first of all, and then analyze it in terms of student and staff outcomes is really critical. There was a 2023 article by Fernandez. This was in the Academy of Educational Leadership Journal, but he talked about all of the things you're saying. He talked about collecting the data and analyze it really allows us as leaders, right, to make informed choices that positively impact student outcomes, staff outcomes. But as we always talk about, Jennie, like we're always learning, right? But so it fosters also a culture of continuous improvement and learning because we're reviewing the data, we're talking about it together. And then, of course, with that comes positive change. We talk about equity, high quality education.
Right.
But the one part that I thought was most and stood out the most to me was like it allows us to engage stakeholders, right? So family members, community members, others who can be involved in the discussion because we have something to show them that they can then talk about as well. So to me, the data always plays a big role.
Right.
Yeah.
And then, I was going to say,
go ahead.
I was going to say, and data's not biased. When I say that
Right.
is, in the early childhood program I was in, we used a template form. Anybody could fill it out.
Right.
And really it was like, okay. And sometimes it would be like, well, maybe I didn't see the antecedent. Then it was like, okay, well, what was the behavior? And then what came afterward? And
Right.
And when I say this is when you do training with people is if you didn't see that present in the form, then you taught them what to look for, right? Then
Right.
I was bettering the staff member to understand this might be it. And then it was like, well, what if we change this? And then the behavior might change. Right. And having that in leadership is more valuable for me is sometimes when people don't understand the consequences. I was going to say, or the behaviors or the antecedents. I was like, if you teach even staff, and maybe it's a 10-minute, very like family-esque conversation, like, hey, has this ever happened to you? And don't make it feel like ridiculing or, hey, you didn't do something or, filling out the template isn't that bad. But again, the data is not biased. The data is going to show you what something's happening.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And that's making me think, Jenny, of like, how do we, just as you're saying, whether it's a 10-minute family ask, I love that, session or quick coaching session. How do you coach, not only school leaders and staff, but also colleagues, right? On balancing, so say compliance with like meaningful behavior-based strategies. So for example, focusing more on the impact and less on the task, you know what I mean? And then if they're focused more on the impact, they might be more likely to focus on what are some behavior-based strategies I can implement. How do you coach school leaders and colleagues and just staff into adopting that mindset, but then implementing it?
So I did a training back like 15 years ago. Again, when I was leaving the I was a special ed leader in a charter high school, and then I went to the city of Philadelphia. But before I left there, we just opened the high school. So we had a very new staff from all over, and a number came from the Catholic school field, if you will, and we're not used to working with children that had IEPs. Yeah. So same thing when I come to the ECE world, I use a professional development. And again, when I say like coaching a school leader or colleagues, an IEP is a legal document, right? And I don't want that to feel heavy. I don't want that to feel heavy for people that are newcomers, but I want them to understand things. And I walk them through in a PD what it's like to be disabled. So like one part is like to have one of the people visually impaired. Also, then I have somebody that loses their hearing. Then I have somebody that has to sit on something because like the diagnosis there is ADHD inattentive, right? So then it was there's a number of people that sit in the classroom and take turns to see what it feels like to be the child in the classroom that's trying to learn. And I do like a very simple math lesson. But it makes it, the feedback that comes from them, they have a better understanding of what it's like to be a child, to learn something in a classroom. Yeah. And again, having the voice of the person participating ends up leading, if you will, the discussion lent to behavior. I was going to say, so they have an understanding like, and it's coming from them. It's not me dictating like, hey, this is how this goes, but it also allows them to understand if I use this strategy, which is like from an ADA principle, if you think of like prompt and fading, right? Yes. Prompt and fading. Even in high school, I insisted like all the ninth grade teachers use a visual schedule, right? And it was timed, but it kind of had, here's what we're doing. These are the classes. And for some of my kids who had high anxiety, they absolutely needed that. But by the end of the year, they didn't need it anymore because it just became, again, it was faded out, and they didn't realize it because it became so routine and the anxiety wasn't there. But you could use that in, 3 to 5-year-olds. Right. And, we want to sit in circle. They do a great job. Then we positive reinforce with a sticker, right? Yeah. These things are something, if you build that in a routine, it doesn't feel like, how do I put this? It doesn't feel like, it's not, I'm not saying, hey, this is a behavior-based strategy. It just becomes part of the classroom.
Right. Yes. It's the routine. It's the norm, right?
Right. It just happens.
Yes. Yes. I love that. And Jennie, as you were talking, it made me think of, this idea or this question of, is this change in behavior or just checking boxes? And based on what you've, the example you just gave, your staff were changing behavior, right? So it's that notion of, what are we really doing here? Do I just want to take the data? Do I just want to check the box to say that I did it? And the child sat, or, and also, is the behavior change lasting, right? To me is another important question. So having said all of that, Jen, you talked about a lot of ABA principles there, really great. Is there a success story you can share of how ABA principles transformed an educational program, you supervised?
Yeah, I was going to say, we had a PBIS program implemented in EC. Again, these are in early childhood. These are 3 to 5-year-olds that I would remind teachers, hey guys, some of these kids haven't been on the earth for 1,000 days. Yeah. So when they come here, we're teaching them how it looks to be in a hallway, how it is to be in a classroom, how we interact with our peers. And I would say that First Then was a big help with PBIS, along with, again, positive reinforcement or a token economy. Right. In early childhood, I would say in the high school component that I worked in, or even when I was working in the city, because I did K through 12 there, but I'd have children that were students in CTE programs, and they have a different criteria to get into some of those schools. Right. And again, prompt and fading was huge. And when I say prompt and fading, using a visual schedule, they would enter, the school year with their classes on the top of their folder, and they'd have to go to class and have it signed by the teachers. And that was just a reminder for them to look down. And it wasn't like you have to get a signature. It was more like, this is where I'm going, to lessen the anxiety of going from one class to the other. Because if you come from a really small grade school and you're going to high school, some of them have 1,200 students in them. Yeah. And they got to move from one class to the other in, 2 minutes? So again, I'd say like the visual schedules and prompt and fading. And when I would tell the team that I would work with, when I say prompt and fading, it's like, you don't have to give them, you don't have to verbalize it. Like if you just look at them and you point down and they know that their schedule's there, because in high school, you don't want to be called out for something that, is special to you. Right. As I say, so I know that, and I don't know, there's plenty of adults that I know that visual schedules and, again, prompt and fading, like, here, I'm giving you something, you're going to start with this, and then it fades out because it just becomes part of the routine. Right. Yes. Absolutely. So having said all of that, Jennie, sometimes we'll experience resistance, right? So whether it's resistance to implementing the strategies you recommended, or taking data, or using the data to drive our decisions, how do you handle staff resistance? I mean, definitely sharing success stories helps. And I'd also that showing them wins within the organization, or wins within the district, or wins within inside of a classroom if you're working with a teacher. Aligning data that everybody's taking, if you will, with the goals Maybe it's for them. Maybe it's for their team. I know that some places use PLCs and they come up with a goal and this is what we're going to have in the end, and making sure that they look at the goal for their team and the data that aligns to it. Just again, data is really unbiased, especially if you're looking at kids and if you're saying, hey, this isn't me as the leader. This is the data that was collected. And if that data is coming from you, if you're the teacher or you're the leader, and if this is what we have, and if we have shortcomings, I'm not the leader that's like, hey, this is terrible. It's more of like, okay, we put this plan in place. What did we put in? Did we miss anything? And if we didn't, then we need to tweak something because the data that we're getting isn't what we want. Right? And I use we a lot because that person's depending on me to be successful as well. Right. So I always want, when I deal with resistance, I want them to know, like, you're not alone. Right. And because I don't want you to feel like if it's a fail. Right. And when I say that is sometimes that's going to happen is you don't go and wash a whole plan because there's a fail. Right. We're not doing that. I don't want them to do that. I want them to say, okay, we know there's goals. This is where we're going. Did we do all the steps we were supposed to? If we didn't, then why not? If there's a barrier, how do I help them get rid of that barrier? And then how do we get there? Yeah. I use a lot of we. I've always used a lot of we because I did have one supervisor in my life that never used we, and I always felt like it was like, well, and I was young. I was a young teacher, and I always wanted to do the best, not just in the school, but for my kids. Yeah. And I just promised I would never make it feel that heavy for someone to go home and feel like it's only me. It's only me. Yeah. So.
Yeah. I love that idea, Jenny, of, really focusing on we instead of like I or you. And then when you mentioned like go home heavy, because it also made me think of, Jenny, it's sort of like a compassionate approach that you're really talking about, because people have all kinds of experiences in their life. And, we talk about trauma a lot, and this person could be experiencing some form of trauma, or there's a trigger or whatever, something might be going on in their life. So I think, just the focus on the word we, to me, just represents yourself as, not only a servant leader, but, a compassionate servant leader, right? Who's thinking about the other, right? And how your words may impact them. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about data. So let's kind of take that and segue into like your role with, legal educational consultation and things like that. So with we know data is critical. If we didn't write it, it didn't happen, right? But also, we use it to measure progress and those kinds of things. But with all of the evolving legal standards, right? And, the increase in legal cases and things like that, how do you stay ahead, Jenny? How do you stay ahead of the game? How do you stay ahead of the knowledge? How do you stay ahead of all of these changes to ensure compliance?
Well, I don't think that I just wait for like an annual training. I treat legal compliance as just a living part of my leadership. Okay. I definitely would say I employ both adaptive and servant leadership styles to manage this portion. I'd say like the legal landscape in education changes constantly. There's always new court rulings that are out there that you can see from ODR or OCR. Yes. I know that the basic education curriculums, the BECs, they're the official updates that come from Pennsylvania. You can see those laws be applied in real time. Yes. But I would say I definitely step back from day-to-day tasks to review internal data against current legal trends. Okay. And to see if the practices that we're using are falling behind the current standards. So whether that be in early childhood, in secondary ed, I would say that I definitely take a step back, and I think it's really easy for me to do. I would say it's called a balcony review because I have a child who's 8 years old, and then I have a child who will soon be 20. Yeah. I do think that like compliance isn't just my job. It belongs to every teacher, therapist, but there's like capacity building for your team. So I try to translate, I would say, dense legal jargon into actual checklists for teams, or ensuring they have the tools to be compliant without being overwhelmed. Because when you're doing it, when you're doing the work in the schools, I know that being on a team, if all you're hearing from legal counsel or someone who's assisting you is you're doing this terrible, here's this, here's that, it doesn't feel good.
Right.
I'd also say like creating, I call it like a holding environment. When like a new legal standard's introduced, it can cause stress.
Yes.
I know that Patan sometimes puts things out and they'll go over it to help staff suggest changes in a safe collaborative space. In the teams that I work in now, they do that as well. So we do like a round table approach.
Okay, wonderful.
I was going to say, and then you get to hear about these updates, but you can also ask questions in a safe space where it doesn't feel like if you have to go back and carry it to a school district, or you're going back to whoever you're working with, that it's, yes, it was an absolute legal matter, but here's how we can avoid these things. I was going to say, I think that the Bureau of Special Education, they always have their cyclical monitoring tools.
Right.
And they have a roadmap, and you can use that to do self-audits, to get ready for, if somebody's coming in and doing their monitoring, then you know what they're looking for.
Right.
So I was going to say, when you stay ahead to ensure compliance is when you're in the work, if you get in there and you can see what people are doing, then you can usually find out where your issues are or where you want to praise people.
Right.
And if you see people that are doing something really good, then you tell your whole team about it, and then you try to replicate that anywhere and everywhere that you can.
Yeah. Wonderful. I picked up a lot from what you were saying. You talked about, you used the word so that they don't feel overwhelmed. And, I think it's a good approach because it makes me think, Jenny, like even with staff, anytime we have to mention a legal case or the word legal, they get stressed, they're nervous, right? So I think even you thinking about that, so they're not overwhelmed, is really gracious on your part. But then also you mentioned so that they know what they're looking for, right? And it makes me think of, again, going back to behavior a bit, like proactive training, proactive preparedness instead of reactive correction, right? So it's sort of like shaping and supporting and molding them so they're prepared and they're ready to have those conversations, as opposed to waiting on something to happen, or waiting on a legal case to then go learn the new legal standard, for example, right, and understand it. So thank you for bringing that into the conversation. I'm curious, Jenny, do you believe that, so in your role as education consultant, we've worked together, as special education supervisors in that realm, early childhood program supervisors, but now, you're really in consultation and legal compliance. So would you say your top 3 leadership principles are different that guide your work in the legal field are different than what would have guided your work in education, or are they similar? What would you say are the top 3 leadership principles that guide your work now?
I'd say they're very similar. I was going to say in education, and what I do now is basically like advocacy. We can't afford to have like a single point of failure.
Right.
So we need leadership at all levels is like the way I look at it. So I try, when I'm working with teams is like, I don't just give tasks. I would say I give authority. Like, my goal is to work myself out of a job, like I told you, by mentoring others to take the lead in their strengths. I believe in empowerment over delegating. I definitely want to say that capacity building, like you had just said, is like not making people feel overwhelmed. If I focus on developing the emotional intelligence and the resilience of my team, as we're doing this work.
Yeah.
In the legal field I am now, but in the special education field, it involves high burnout rates.
Yeah.
And again, I see my role as like an architect of like culture where others feel safe to be innovative.
Yeah.
And I'm saying that because in special education and in educational consulting, I look for people who challenge the status quo.
Okay.
And like so I'm a servant leader, but when you're an adaptive leader, it teaches us that, these voices are often the early warning signs for needed change. So like I call them sometimes in the educational consulting field, I'm going to call them like the agitators, right? You'll get maybe you get the same cases it's the same language, it's the same law firm, and they're going, and you're like, okay, this is something I need to look at now, because now I've had 3 cases with the same 3 things, and maybe it wasn't on my radar before, right?
Yeah.
And so putting me in the educational consultant field, if I see 3 different clients, but I have the same law firm, and they're using the same language, and they're going after 3 different clients, is it you're just using something to see if that person has made the mistake or they truly know of a gap that we weren't aware of. So I think that, again, I'm always for empowering people. I'm always about building capacity, and I really do try to look for early warning systems. And sometimes in educational leadership, and again, having compassion, sometimes when the warning signs come, it's not pro forma. It's not something that you know about. It might be something that catches you off guard, and then you're spending 2 hours later that evening because you're like, I think I found my own internal data that might speak to it. And then you have to come up with a plan. As I say, my job now is to, really help teams understand, like, if this is the same hole that I'm seeing in, if you will, case files in the same school or district or organization, then internally, I try to give them 2 or 3 ways that they can best, get everybody on the same page and fix that. And it doesn't mean it's going to be a full day PD. It might just be a Zoom call. Do you know what I mean? And it's just writing notes on a child. Maybe they realize, like, you can't write the way your brain thinks inside of an internal system. And the way I used to say to all my staff that I've ever worked with, like you said, in special ed, if you didn't write it down, it didn't happen.
Right.
But I used to say to my staff, if you can't put it on a billboard on 95 and feel good about it, then you probably shouldn't be putting it in the child's note.
I love that. Yeah. If you can't put it on a billboard on 95 and be proud about it, then you probably shouldn't be putting it into a child's notes.
Right. And I mean, confidentiality-wise, take the child's name out of it, but some of the stuff that I would read on files, I'm like, I would generally have a conversation and just say to the person, do you have a child? Okay, if somebody wrote this about your child, what would be your reaction? And it'd be like, okay, so how could we formulate this in a different way?
Yeah.
And that sometimes that is just a 15-minute PD on how do you write proper notes on a child's negative behaviors, right? But you can't write the child's wilding out in the classroom. I don't know what wilding out means.
Exactly.
And I would say, if I put that on a billboard and said, hey, could you draw a picture of this? Would this be okay? Do you want to see that in somebody's file? No? Okay, well then that's our answer. Like, we can do better.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. We can always do better.
I
mean, I heard you say so many things, Jennie, that lend themselves to this idea of, fidelity and leadership, right? Thinking of fidelity as supportive leadership as opposed to surveillance, right? So things like comments like, was it a mistake or is it a gap we were not aware of, right? You talked about empowerment over delegating. You talked about building capacity. You said, we have to find a win in every day. So what I'm curious about, Jennie, is, what leadership strategies do you employ to ensure fidelity or supportive leadership as opposed to surveillance? Like, I'm hearing a lot of them, as we're having this conversation, but I'm wondering, are there other strategies you use intentionally to ensure that you're being supported as a leader, as opposed to just being someone who just, walks the halls to serve, to engage in surveillance and, find opportunities to say, this is not what you should be doing, for example. What strategies do you use?
I think my delivery would be measured by like how well I provide the resources and removal of barriers for staff. I'd say to maintain high standards, I use clear metrics, whether it's, I'd say, IEP compliance or student growth data to ensure we aren't just busy but effective. So like being transparent and data loops, like you're seeing it, here's what we're looking at. This is also the, I'm going to call it again, I think it's like the balcony perspective is like, I get up and on the big picture is I observe the systematic patterns in our school or the district or the organization and ensure our daily actions align with our long-term mission or our goals. So, implementing a PBIS program wasn't to implement a PBIS program. It was, we want to make sure that we're improving behaviors for, 3 to 5 year olds. And when we came out of the pandemic, everybody I know in the tri-state area was dealing with the same thing. It was these increased behaviors because the child never had interaction socially. Right. So again, it's really observing systematic patterns in the schools. And again, don't go and throw away the whole plan.
Yeah.
Maybe it's tweaking something. And I definitely would say that, and I mean, for fidelity and I'd say feedback. I don't just observe. I serve along with my team. Being present in the trenches, in the classroom, I ensure, my directives are actually grounded in the reality of the educator's daily experience. Not just, there's some leaders that this is what I said, this is how it goes, and they might haven't been there. I just think that really being grounded in that reality is helpful and having and provide the feedback to say, hey, I was there today, this is what I saw, and making sure that if it's not compliant, it's not about being stern and it's not about making someone feel terrible. It's really having them understand why something wasn't compliant and how it makes them better as whether it's a para-educator, an educator, a leader, to make sure that they really understand, like, here's the flip side of it. When you do this correctly, this is going to be the outcome. We're not getting the outcomes because we didn't do this.
Yeah.
And again, I think it's just natural for me to say we, because I feel like when I would see, whether it's a teacher or a leader or a para-educator not do well, I would always self-reflect on how can I do better.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And you mentioned, you talk a lot about, there's this theme in our conversation about present leadership. So being present, being on the floor, being visible, being in the trenches, right? What then would you say are your views on developing leaders, who are also present leaders like yourself, and whether it's education, special education, whether it's advocacy as you're doing now, educational consultation or anything else? How do you develop leaders, so that, as we, we move up and move on out, and retire and all those things, that we're building a force that continues to lead in ways, that we're leading and in ways that we have led?
I think it's having truthful conversations. And I have to put this out there because I don't know that I've said it. It's like, is developing a leader in education, special ed, early childhood, something that I had to learn, and I would say is one of the biggest takeaways is active listening. Modeling what you want to say and active listening, because there's a difference between listening to respond and then there's active listening. And I think that when you're developing a leader in education, especially special education, or if you're advocating, is really listen to whoever is on the other side and understand where they're coming from, take a moment to reflect on, okay, how can I help them, or how can I lead them in the direction either A, that the organization needs them to go, or B, maybe there's a human component to what they're saying, right? You had brought up before, like maybe somebody's going through trauma on their own. Maybe there's a trigger from one of these children. But if you're not active listening and you're constantly on a checklist of, did you do this? Did you do this? Did you do this? Did you turn this in? Was that done? Then you're not really developing a human. You're developing a mechanism to do really well with paperwork, but you're not developing a person to get better in the craft they went to school for.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And what I love most about what you said, you talked about modeling, but you talked about active listening, right? So there's this idea of listening to respond, versus listening to react. So then in all of that, we're building these leaders, right, to continue this good work in education, special education, early childhood, whichever path they choose. How do you then ensure that in addition to building our leaders, right, that we're the voices of members of the community, right, the educational and neighborhood communities in which we serve, and some of us live in the communities that we serve, how do we make sure we have community voice in what we do?
Definitely, I'd say I'm going to go back to it's deep listening. It's an active. It's doing listening tours, or like I told you, like I call it family-esque, or a kitchen table style meeting where the goal it's not for me to speak. It's to absorb the lived experiences of parents and neighbors, and then I view myself as the listener and first leader. I believe like the community is not a client of the school, but a partner, right? You can't do the work without the community. The community is in your building. Whether they're your babies or they're getting ready to leave and go to college, that the community is in your building. So definitely, I'm going to go back to listening tours are great, and you can do that in when I was in the city, I had 54 different schools. But I went in once a month to all my schools, and you also can have, cause some people weren't always happy, but I would call it like orchestrating conflict. And when I say that, it's like, I recognize hearing all the voices often means like bringing conflicting perspectives sometimes in the same room. But if I hold and I create an environment where parents, teachers, and community members can have a difficult but necessary conversation about like equity and access, creating that space, again, I'm calling it orchestrating conflict because we know there's a problem. We need to find a solution. But you have to be able to create that space, and you have to be a trusted leader. And when I say that, not all community members, and I used to say this in most of my jobs, I know that most of the jobs that I was in that I did not look like the people that I served. But I would make sure that they had a voice, that they were heard, and I wanted to make sure that they had shared, governance of what we do. So like in a lot of schools, they have advisory boards. I was going to say, I had policy council, which is federal Head Start. They're your community members. They're not just our parents, but we also had local community members that were involved. In most of in the city, we had home and school, right? So we had people that were from the community and we had people from the school. And there's also advisory boards, but real decision-making power is held within those groups, and it makes sure that the community's fingerprint, right, is on major changes that we implement. So I think that, again, the biggest part, and I say this for every leader, and it doesn't matter, I can't even just say in education, but active listening, I would say with human services, right, when you're dealing with humans, and I think that was one of the hardest things for me to learn because I had taught special education for 10 years where you do a lot of talking.
Right.
So then when you have to start being an active listener, you have a different skill set that you have to start to use and learn, because there's a difference, again, between listening for intent or listening to respond and active listening.
Yeah. And I really love this statement, Jenny, the communities in your building. You know, I always talk about including community, but I never thought of it that way, right? I always think of them like external, you know. But I love that phrase. I wrote that one down, the communities in your building. I love that.
Yes.
So let's start to wrap this up, Jenny, with like just leadership lessons that you can leave our listeners with. So how do you build and sustain a positive learning culture, you know, in any of the environments you've worked in and in your current environment?
Active listening and being with the work. Get into the work. Be in the work. And that's not just a teacher, but that's a leader as well.
Yeah. I love that. Active listening, be in the work, get in the work.
Get in the work.
Yeah. How do you encourage self-advocacy, Jenny? Not just, you know, from the student level, but from the staff level, the employee level, self-advocacy, self-development behaviors in those that you lead. So like they can advocate for themselves. This is what I want to do. This is where I want to go. But then develop those skills, right? So they move from where they are to where they could be.
I triumph on their strengths. I make sure that not just that I just don't recognize them. As long as I usually have a conversation, maybe it's in a one-to-one, but making sure that they know, like, I'd really like to I don't like the word showcase, because I feel like that's it's more like, I'd really like to share with our team that you have this strength, but I'd like you to lead that as well, right? And when I say lead it, I don't want them to feel like if you don't do well one day, it's going to, again, feel heavy. I just want people to know that you have this strength, because eventually, after year one, if I have the same team, I want everybody to know everybody has different strengths, and hey, maybe I can lean on you. Yeah. To make sure. And also for like self-advocacy, like, hey, I need help. Because if it's always I need help to the leader, right? Then the leader is always helping every part of the team. But if the team can start to help themselves within that team, and then be able to come to the leader and be like, hey, I helped out this person. As long as we're all working for the same goal and the same outcome, and we're having a positive trajectory, great.
Yeah.
And then they're also bonding to know, hey, I can rely on another person on my team, and it's not just me as well.
Yeah, I love that. What would you say to listeners or, you know, administrators or emerging leaders, Jenny, about leading, you know, change that's really rooted in behavior?
Don't give up when the model doesn't work after 8 weeks.
Yeah. Yes.
Right? Because people will they mark that deadline on there, like, this, and if, you know, tweak a weakness and then try again. But you know what? Make sure you gain feedback. Yeah. For the tweak that you're going to make. And don't make it in isolation. So as an administrator, it's really easy to look at data and be like, this is the change I want to make. Yeah. And sometimes I'm not saying that you have the opportunity to do what I'm saying, but I'm saying is if you can go to your team and say, I looked at the data, here's what I think we should change, and you can get the feedback from your team, it'll either A, reassure you that you were thinking this is a good tweak to make, or B, it's going to come up with something different, but you have to be open to that suggestion because you have a team of people looking at the same information that you were looking at.
Wonderful. And then to close us out, Jenny, out of all of the wonderful, you know, nuggets you shared with us, shared with me, which will be shared with listeners, you know, during this conversation, what would you say are the top 3 ones you want them to walk away with from this conversation?
I'd say all children can learn with the proper tools. Yeah. Active listening is sometimes the hardest skill to learn when you've talked most of your career, but it's the most valuable as a leader. Yeah. And ask questions. Own your seat at any table and believe in the work that you're doing. If you're doing the work for children to be better, then that's what the end goal is, and a child will be better from the questions or how you advocate at the seat that you're sitting in.
I love that. So I heard all children can learn with the proper tools. active listening could be hard, maybe the hardest thing to do, but it is the most valuable. And then ask questions and earn your seat at the table. Yes?
Yeah, own it. Own your seat at the table, not earn it. Okay. Don't earn it. No. Once you get a seat at any table, I believe at any table, believe in the work that you're doing. If you're doing the work for children, then that's what the end goal is. And a child will be better from that.
Wonderful. So ask questions, own your seat at the table, and believe in the work you're doing. Wonderful, wonderful, Jenny. I love those 3 takeaways to conclude our conversation. Again, Jenny, thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate you being here. I made notes, so I learned a lot from what you said, which I'm going to put into my practice, which I'm going to share with team members. And, I hope that we continue to have opportunities to collaborate with each other.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. This was wonderful.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you for tuning in to Behaviorally Speaking, Leadership for Changemakers. Jenny, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your experiences, and your heart for students, families, and educators. You reminded us that all children can learn with the proper tools, that leaders must listen actively, and that we should own our seat at the table. If this episode resonated with you, I encourage you to reflect on how behavior-driven decision-making, collaboration, and compassion show up in your own leadership practice. Remember to follow Behaviorally Speaking, Leadership for Changemakers, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who's committed to creating meaningful, inclusive change. Until next time, I'm Dr. Esther Bubb. Lead with purpose, lead with data, and always lead with humanity.